Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. I am your host, Q, coming to you yet again from my mother's basement. And we continue with our exclusive reports today in just a moment. And I want to remind everyone today is a jam-packed Bitcoin Magazine Live episode. Once we wrap today's coverage of the Hodlonaut v. Wright defamation case, we're going to jump into an interview with none other than Jeff Booth. And then shortly after that, we will have Ansel, Lindner, and Snarks join us for a new episode of FedWatch. But let's kick things off with day 3, the recap video of day 3 of the Hodlonaut v. Wright trial. Roll the tape.
It was the third day of the Hodlonaut versus Craig Wright trial. The first half of the day, Hodlonaut was on the stand. First, questions were posed by Hodlonaut's lawyers and then by Craig Wright's lawyers, and then the judge had the opportunity to ask any other questions. The second half was Craig Wright on the stand. Hodlonaut's lawyer started out asking general life backstory, talked about when Hodlonaut got into Bitcoin, when he started Twitter, and really, after going through that chronology, then talked about the chronology specifically of this case. After we went through the timeline, we went through a lot of fake Toshi tweets, and we also cited the Craig Wright is a fraud hashtag, and we are all Hodlonaut hashtag. When Craig Wright's lawyer started asking questions of Hodlonaut, he was focusing a lot on the emotion and the purpose behind. He asked multiple times if this is how Hodlonaut usually speaks. After Craig Wright's lawyer was done, the judge pointed out that it seems as though there's been a lot of defamation towards Hodlonaut as well. She asked, how is this any different? Craig Wright took the stand, and his lawyer asked a lot of questions about the history. It felt a little repetitive of a lot of what we covered yesterday. Hodlonaut's lawyer began by highlighting Craig Wright's Wikipedia page and asking about his conviction status. After this, there was a very messy conversation about keys.
What would it take for you to then access the private keys?
The whole point is you don't need the private keys. That's what I'm trying to tell people.
Slice keys, private keys. There was a lot of back and forth about how, if he could, decrypt.
Once you have proven your identity, then you register the key. You don't do it the other way around. You can't come in later and go, I promise this was my key.
And then Craig Wright kind of went on a rant about Bitcoin not being encrypted.
I want to make sure that judges and courts understand that Bitcoin is not encrypted and it can be seized, frozen, and accessed under a court order.
So the judge's closing question was very interesting.
Just help me understand why proving in that way. I understand what you're saying, that writing with a signature is not proving identity. I understand your point. Why is that harder for you to do than whatever it is you're going through here and in other court cases?
It's not emotionally difficult. I mean, it was, but it's harder to do.
We'll start with all the witnesses tomorrow, but for now, good night.
Some interesting remarks, and we are excited to be joined by none other than our reporter on the ground, Mills, as well as our special guest today, Ben. Mills, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for your excellent reporting. Day 3 in the books, we had both Hodlonaut and Craig Wright take the stand. Let's start first with Hodlonaut. What were the line of questioning? How did he handle it? And what did Craig Wright's team ask him specifically?
Yeah, it was kind of a little redundant of day 1, where it was his story, and it was the history, how he found out about Bitcoin, when he found out about Bitcoin, and then also his interaction and relationship with Twitter and how he grew on Twitter as well. And so talking about the Lightning Torch Trust Chain as well. So that was the initial path that his lawyer took. And then the actual specific tweets that this case is about were read and gone through. And specific words, were asked. I would say more than anything, Hodlonaut's lawyer was definitely focusing on making sure that there was a timeline in order of this happened, this was the situation, because when Craig Wright's lawyer started questioning, it was a little bit more scattered as far as timeline, and also saying that, he had all of this influence, all of these millions of views, all of this impression from, Jack Dorsey, any of the people that through the Lightning Trust chain had become a part of his circle. And so citing groups on Telegram, citing, other network things. So after that initial overview, the cross-examination was very interesting because it was taking specific words and basically saying, do you speak like this normally? Is this, the way that you behave and carry yourself? And it was kind of a loose argument in my estimation, but other people within the like Taco Club group or other Telegram groups, their words were cited as well, to maybe say that he kept this rough company. But then the thing that kind of was the most, I guess, tangential and seemingly not super related were some of his Hodlonaut's tweets about personal views. And I would say there were a couple, not supporting the current thing that were cited to maybe discredit his character and make him seem like he's a radical or that he's, not to be trusted. So that was kind of the overview of the Hodlonaut on the stand. But also, the judge asked her an interesting question at the end. She said, hey, anything else that you want to share? But she also said, it sounds like you've had a lot of defamation as well. And that was something that Hodlonaut's lawyer did bring up, was the various smear campaigns that CoinGeek, through the bounty, but also there were a lot of name calling that was happening towards Hodlonaut. And some of the specifics were brought up in court as well. And so the judge, in her closing statement, said, it sounds like you've had a lot of defamation also. And she asked if Hodlonaut had any last words, and he said, I never really used the word defamation very much until this whole situation. So I'll kick it over to Ben. Ben also was able to be in court today, and it was cool. We had maybe 20, maybe that's a little high, maybe like 10 plebs that were there in support in person. That it was, and I think that Hodlonaut told me it really meant a lot to have people there showing up to support him. So Ben, what would you say?
Oh man, I flew in to Oslo last night because I knew this was kind of the meat of the trial. We got to. I'm only here for one day, unfortunately. I don't get to see all the other witnesses, but was able to see Hodlonaut testify, be cross-examined, as well as Craig Wright. And of course, I think the most interesting piece of the whole day and probably trial was Craig Wright being cross-examined, getting the questions that might actually push on some of the stories that he's been telling in the past. And the takeaway for me was, with Hodlonaut, he started out in the morning. I think he kept his composure. I think he owned what he said. He didn't deny anything. He stayed grounded in reality, which is realistically what happened. So I wasn't really bullish or bearish after the morning session. But then Craig Wright took the stand, and even with his own lawyers, they decided to go through. I think the biggest chunk was like the Jameson Lopp, how many wrongs does it take to make a right article? And they went bullet by bullet on each of these kind of, I guess, like refutation points as to like why Craig may or may not be Satoshi. And I didn't think the answers even from his own legal team, they just didn't seem super prepped on their side. Craig seemed to be almost getting caught in lies from his own legal team, although it was okay. But then once the cross-examination started, I mean, literally within 90 seconds, the Hodlonaut's lawyer had to call him out and say, you literally just told a lie. By the way, let's remind you, you're under oath. And then it just, they pushed really hard on just the nature of kind of the Tulip Trust and, where these keys live. Craig was trying to, it seemed like, pull some roundabout technical jargon around Shamir secret keys, which ultimately, split a single private key up. But he seemed to be going into these nuances, trying to kind of deflect the main points. And by the end of it, about an hour and a half in, it was just there was just new stories being concocted on the fly from my perspective, and it didn't look great. That being said, it's, in the legal system, it's like it takes one slip up. I feel like one word, one like little nuance, and the whole case can turn. But the day was certainly. I felt honored to be in the same room with such a talented storyteller. I'll put it that way. It was very clear that things were being kind of created on the fly. At some points, there were emails that he wrote when he was drunk, but it turns out it was actually someone else writing emails. I mean, I have a bunch of quotes here and notes that I tweeted out today, but there's a few gems. I mean, he's apparently going after Ethereum next because he created NFTs. There was a lot of pushing on the point that like signing with a private key does not conflate identity, which is actually true, but it would solve the entire case in his favor. And the very end point was, hey, like, I just don't want this to be over. It was essentially, he simultaneously was complaining about all the time and money he's wasting, all the patents he could have had if he didn't have to go to trial. And then the judge is basically like, hey, like everyone agrees here, if you sign this transaction, like that's good enough. And he didn't want it to be over, was the quote. They're, again, more technical nonsense. Like these lawyers and judges don't know, like, what a key shard is. And so there was a lot of pushing on that. There was a lot of bringing up old points around, like, we kept hearing Bitcoiners, small block maxis, and how all we wanted to do was protect our drug usage, it was porn, dark web. We don't want to pay taxes. There was a lot of like kind of old points being brought up. And then like many, many times he brought up the fact that Bitcoin was unencrypted and that the court and law enforcement have the ability to essentially dictate the blockchain, that he would be able to, he destroyed his private keys or the Shamir shares of his private keys. But if there was a court order, then essentially the court could overrule the blockchain in some way, shape, or form. And then he was alluding to minor centralization. It was just all over the place. And you could tell there was a lot of deflecting, a lot of like kind of hopes that I think people would get wrapped up in the technical jargon and miss the point. But it was a wild one. I mean, I can dive into whatever we want to, but
So
it was.
I want to dive into that, Ben, because like I'm going to smooth brain this a little bit. Hearing what Craig Wright said in the clip that we shared, that based on a court order, Bitcoin can be forced and the blockchain can be forced to do what a court of law says. I honestly need to quit my job and like go back to the books, because I was always under the impression that actually was the one thing that made the Bitcoin blockchain so secure. Can you explain a scenario in which what Craig Wright is describing could come to fruition, or can you think of one?
Yeah, I think there's two scenarios. He kept alluding to the fact that Bitcoin was centralized around 13 miners, I think was the number he kept using, and that 53% of the hash power was concentrated with 3 companies. And while there is some concentration in the mining space, like I guess what he was alluding to was like if there was he almost made it sound like a court could just do like a op return and say basically the Bitcoin in the first 12 blocks belong to this person and not that person, and that like everything would magically fix itself and the Bitcoin would go where it wants. And that's just like not how proof of work exists. Like I guess his point then he would make around centralization is the fact that like, okay, three companies, and don't quote me on this. I don't know my facts perfectly, but was essentially there's a few miners that own 53% of the hash rate. So I think what he was alluding to is they could 51% attack and like start back at the genesis and reallocate these coins. But I mean, you'd have to 51% attack for years at this point. I think the alternative, which might actually be the case, is Craig considers BSV Bitcoin. And maybe BSV could easily reorg, and whoever owns the tokens from the early blocks could be dictated by a court order. But he repeatedly said, my mission is to let the court. He was trying to empower the judge. Like you are in the control. Like law enforcement is in control. And if you say that these people own the coins, then they own the coins, and all you have to do is say it. And like as we all know from like the technical understanding of how proof of work and blockchain works, like you really can't do that without some sort of massive reorg. And so my best guess was he maybe was alluding to the fact that BSV was Bitcoin and that would be easily reorged. But it's hard to follow, man. Like the longer it went on, the first 10 minutes were semi-coherent. 20 minutes in, you're like, okay, what the hell? And then, 80 minutes in, it's just like there's just new things being made up on the fly. And yeah, that was my perception, at least.
It was almost 4 hours, to be clear. And the Hodlonaut was the first part of the day, and then they started Craig Wright's testimony before lunch. We broke for lunch, and then we were still with with Craig Wright's lawyer, and then we had maybe an hour, a little bit more, of Hodlonaut's lawyer doing cross-examination. But in total, it was about 4 hours that Craig Wright was on the stand, and it was a lot of different directions and a lot of plots that went different places. So it was kind of hard to, it wasn't a very circuitous day.
Mills, I want to follow up on our conversations we've had the last couple of days on the judge. On day one, we established that Hodlonaut's team was really walking this judge through just the history of Bitcoin, a highly technical conversation and layout. We had yesterday Craig Wright's lawyers present their opening remarks. Based on what I'm hearing of specifically during the Hodlonaut cross-examination, this judge is tracking very, very well. And even during this Craig Wright cross-examination, she's showing her technical understanding by saying something as simple as what Ben alluded to of, if you just sign off on this transaction, like, we're done here. So are we feeling as though the judge has a strong grasp on the technical components that will impact this case?
Yeah, and actually it was a question I also asked Hodlonaut today after the trial, just like, how are you feeling? Do you feel like this judge is tracking? I think based on the way in which her final questions, both with Hodlonaut and with Craig Wright at the end of their cross-examination, they were very insightful questions and really do go to show that she's tracking. For this amount of nuance and information and history, because we're hearing, Craig Wright's basically life history. We're hearing the history of this technology, and we're hearing, Hodlonaut's personal history as well. So there's these 3 different storylines that are all intertwined. I feel like she is understanding enough that it seems very promising. I mean, I don't want to make speculations, but I was a little skeptical, I guess, maybe the first day, because Hodlonaut's lawyer was very serious and very, not monotone, but very kind of just businessy and going rather quick through a lot of things. There wasn't as much of a personality put with it. And then Craig Wright's lawyer was a little bit more affable and just not like smiley, but he really was a little bit more personable. And so I would say that probably made the day go by a lot quicker, was just their different bedside manners. However, now that kind of stoic nature was really impactful in the cross-examination with Craig Wright. And I do feel like, it's anyone's game, I guess, at this point, but I wanted to highlight something the judge said. It was an analogy that was actually brought up by Craig quite a few times about, if you have the car keys, it doesn't mean it's your car. And he kept going back to that point of, if he just signed something from block 1 through 12, that it really wouldn't prove anything. And he even cited Jameson Lopp of saying that if he did actually sign something, he would just assume that Craig Wright had stolen that key. And his answer to that, and the judge in her final question was, why don't you just do this? And his answer was surprising in that he said, if I do that, no one will ever look into anything else. As soon as I sign with a key, it's over. And if Craig ever signs with a key, all it will prove is that he stole it. That was a quote of him quoting Jameson Lopp. So he then kind of finished his talk by discussing that he wants to prove personally much more than technically. And he said many times on the stand that he never intends on signing anything, and talked a lot about smashing his thumb drive, his USB drive and hard drive with his shoe, not with a hammer, and that it was never to be done again. It was a very, like, he does not want to do it that way.
I thought one interesting piece was it kind of came out towards the end that the signing session. So he kept drilling in the fact that a private key signature does not conflate identity, and I think that's true. We all understand that. The judge understood that. That's where just because you have a car key doesn't mean you own the car analogy. And the judge was certainly technically capable, and everyone in the room, I think, was technically capable enough to understand that. The fact is, though, is that, like, that's all anyone is asking for, and that would be enough for, like, burden of proof, I think. That being said, I think there were a few things that Craig kept saying, which someone with a little more technical prowess could have called out. I wish either the lawyers or the judge herself would have said something around when he was saying that all it takes is a court order, and Bitcoin can be owned by anyone. I wish someone with some knowledge of, like, proof of work, or potentially even what that would look like, which is a reorg or a 51% attack, or I wish someone would have pushed him on that. And then there were just, there were certain things he kept going back on. He kept touching on algorithms. He kept touching on Shamir secret sharing, which is creating keys, essentially just creating shards of a single key, similar to a multi-sig, where you have, multiple keys that are signing, like a 3 of 5. There's 3 of 5 private keys. Shamir secret is essentially 3 shards of a single key, but very similar tech. He just kept alluding to these things. He kept going back to, like, RPC, role procedure calls, like things that, like, my co-founder Ben Carman would have just been like, okay, like, this is just a term, but no one in the room really had, I think, the prowess to call him out on it. But the big one, though, was kept saying law enforcement and courts have the ability to determine who owns what, and that's just simply not the case. And I wish maybe someone would have pushed him on that, because for those of us in the audience that know how Bitcoin works, it was that was a bit of a gap in the argument there, which no one was called out for. I would have loved to hear his answer there.
I'm sure there will be plenty of other things that we're going to look back on and say when this raw footage, which our team is currently uploading, we are getting it to all the appropriate media outlets as well. Bear with us. I see it in the chats. People are asking. It is over 4 hours of raw footage from today's court case, so please just bear with us. Internet bandwidth and upload speeds are really what's holding us back, but we are also getting it to all of the appropriate parties that have asked for it as well, so it is not just coming exclusively from Bitcoin Magazine. I do want to touch on there was a pushback that I believe, Ben, you mentioned, that Hodlonaut's lawyers pressed Craig Wright saying, you more or less, I'm going to paraphrase, that he was lying and that he is under oath to please be careful because you are under oath. With the witnesses coming up in the next few days, if any of these witness testimonies, whether they be Craig Wright's witness or they be Hodlonaut's witness, if any of their information begins to conflict with what Craig Wright has said, can either Hodlonaut's lawyers or the judge ask Craig to go back on the stand?
I certainly don't know. Mills would probably be the one to
No, this is for our Norwegian legal expert, specific Mills.
Wow. No, I don't know specifically, but what was cool, because so the first half, Hodlonaut's cross-examination and examination was all in Norwegian, but for Craig Wright's, it was all in English. So we were able, the judge did the kind of swearing in English as well. So we were able to really hear it was similar to, I taking the stand in America, but it was more, I don't know specifically truly if they could call, I don't know if there's legal precedent for that, but it was very clear that there is no leeway for lying. I don't know. And it said, and this is a criminal act if you do lie on the stand. So I don't know exactly. I'll look into that and ask around at court too. It's a great question. Oh,
thank you.
One other thing too.
Please.
You mentioned we are going to be uploading, as I mentioned, the entire Craig Wright cross-examine and examine was in English. So we are uploading that. After we finish uploading it to our press pool on Dropbox for all the media outlets, we will upload that onto our YouTube. But the Norwegian examination and cross-examination of Hodlonaut, we are working with some Norwegian plebs to get that transcribed so that we can post that and it can be read, because as much as we could also publish that, I know there's a lot of non-Norwegian speaking plebs that would love. So we're doing a similar coverage and sharing, just in the most suitable way for the language.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work you guys are doing out there and getting all this information out to everyone as timely as possible. I want to just get a sense of, I know you had an opportunity to speak to Hodlonaut after the case. What were his feelings after day 3, after both cross-examinations, as well as did you have the opportunity to speak to someone from Craig Wright's camp, and same question directed towards his camp?
Yeah, he said that Hodlonaut said that he was feeling relieved. I mean, today really was kind of the biggest thing for him. And one thing he pointed out was, he didn't have to really prep so much because he was going on the stand to tell the truth. And so it wasn't as much as rehearsing and memorizing so much. But as far as Craig Wright's team, I've been talking quite a bit with the CoinGeek media people, but as far as his legal counsel, I haven't had any direct contact. We actually, when we were filming the interview after court today with Hodlonaut, they were filming us filming because they're filming a documentary. Calvin Air has a production company that's doing a documentary. So it was a little meta feeling, but I will work to get a kind of status update from their side as well. And more than anything, it's just in process, and it's cool to be able to get a moment in time because we don't, it's begun. We don't know how it's going to end. We don't know how all of these witnesses are going to go. And I do have an update. As of now, Craig has 10 witnesses, and technically Hodlonaut has 4, one of them being a company that is 3 different witnesses, but it's technically counted as 4 witnesses. So it's an imbalance similar to the lawyers, but Hodlonaut having 4 witnesses, Craig Wright currently having 10.
I'm confused. I thought last we spoke, the judge had asked Craig Wright and his team to whittle their witness list down. Have we just got it doubled?
I think the number that I had was incorrect, or I had just given the Hodlonaut number both to Craig Wright. I'm counting the names, and I think within some of the names there's multiple witnesses. Apologies, because I am reading a lot of Norwegian legal documents, but I am honestly trying to be as good of a reporter. It's a language barrier, but that's honestly, today was very cool to be able to actually hear the inflection and know what was being said with what inflection. It was very helpful as far as being sure that I was accurately transcribing.
Thank you very much, Mills. Before we wrap here, any final words before we close for a commercial break? I know we're going to get another update from you tomorrow as well as Friday. And then the final 2 will be Monday and Wednesday of next week. The court is not going to be in session on Tuesday.
I have a couple, just some quick hit ones. Craig apparently let go of his legal team right before this case because he wanted to bring in more witnesses and they wanted legal documents. I thought that was very interesting. It came out today that he has no intention of ever signing this transaction, and that the original, in his words, the original signing session with Gavin was never intended to prove he was Satoshi. So I think it's obvious, or it's clear why there would maybe be some misunderstanding as to whether anyone would be able to determine whether he is or isn't Satoshi. And then from my gut, it just seems like there's a long way to go. I think this is an interesting day with Craig and Hodlonaut taking the stand. But it seems like Craig's team is positioning maybe more towards like Hodlonaut inciting the community to, stand up against Craig. They quoted a lot of his Telegram chats and things outside of Twitter. And so it'll just be interesting to see, I'm sure they have an attack vector here that they're planning on going after. And it's all it's all just law. And so, even though you feel good one day and bad the next, like it'll be really interesting to see how this progresses when you get to the nitty gritty of like what the actual law is and where the attack vectors are. But it's a team of 9 smart lawyers, it seems like. So, we'll see.
Mills, any final words?
I'm excited to start going through the witnesses. I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm a little trepidatious in what Ben was just mentioning is the previous team of lawyers wanted more documents and more emphasis on collecting documents for proof. And Craig Wright on the stand was saying how he wants witnesses, and he had been trying, he has 70 apparently now and is trying to get to 100. And talked about tracking people down all over the world just to kind of corroborate. And it seems like he's trying to do this relational corroboration. So I'm very interested to see what these witnesses will say. And it's been interesting to see on Twitter some of the names that he's even mentioned. Twitter's a very deep place to be right now. And there's a lot of people coming forward saying that they would testify, or I encourage everyone to, there's Bit Norbert, and there's a couple other BSVers that are also real-time live tweeting. And I'm also doing kind of a summary recap every 10-ish minutes of kind of what we're moving on to and what we're discussing. So that's a fun way to follow along, and we will be updating some of the footage hopefully tonight.
Yes, I will admit I may or may not have caught the first flurry of tweets. Those start at 3 a.m. Eastern time, midnight Pacific time. That's when the trial kicks off. Follow Specific Mills for all these trial updates as well. Thank you both for joining us today. Thank you for your work on the ground, Mills. We're going to cut to a commercial break here, and we're going to be joined by Jeff Booth for an interview. Before we do, I want to remind everyone that tickets for Bitcoin Amsterdam are on sale. Use promo code BMLive and get 10% off before ticket prices go up again. Ticket prices went up last Friday. They're going to go up next Friday or the Friday after that. I don't know. Someone didn't give me that date. But buy them now before ticket prices go up. We'll be back after this.
You are listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Number one Bitcoin Magazine Live. You are listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Number one Bitcoin Magazine Live. Stand by.
Thank you for sticking with us through those commercial breaks. I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, one of my favorite authors and commentators in the Bitcoin space. He's the author of The Price is Tomorrow. He's been featured in countless news publications, including Forbes, Time, Wall Street Journal, and of course, Bitcoin Magazine. He's co-founded, been a part of, and a chairman of, honestly, way too many companies for me to name here. Jeff Booth, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing, and welcome to the show.
Hey, great to see you.
Jeff, I didn't want to name which one of your companies just popped up on that short list I had. Did you want to highlight any of the work you're doing in particular? Anything I missed in that introduction?
No, that's good. And I'm involved in a bunch of technology startups, and in that space, there's also risk in that space, but it's but you have just crazy asymmetric bets as well.
That is quite a guitar collection behind you. Which one of those guitars is your favorite guitar?
Probably the first real one I bought, a Guild. It's not even in there. It's just just the left. So I bought it when I was 20 years old, and when I
Wow.
could afford a nice guitar. So yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you for joining us.
Jeff, for our audience who hasn't had the chance to read The Price of Tomorrow, which if you have not, you now have a homework assignment this weekend. It will take you just this weekend if you sit down and focus for a few hours to finish it, and then it will take you a lifetime to absorb what you actually teach in that book. Could you just share a little bit about your background first before we dive into how you sort of stumbled into Bitcoin and deeper into the technology space?
Yeah, I'd just say I'm an entrepreneur and always been curious about kind of where to create value. And so I dropped out of school, dropped out of university to start a business. And then what you learn through that process is kind of how to create value. And in that, it's most of the things you end up doing as you're trying to create value for other people, as you realize that you learn more and more. You hit walls and you overcome those walls, and or you don't, and you learn again. And so that whole process of being an entrepreneur, just throwing myself into the deep end of a whole bunch of first one company and then many different companies, was just a massive learning process. And that led to kind of early in the internet adoption, me starting a company called Build Direct that kind of had three different iterations on that company. It eventually, at one time, it was worth about $500 million, had 350 employees, and just kind of all the learning that would take place in building companies and scaling companies at that. And what I recognized, and I talked about it kind of prior to writing the book for about 10 years, is in that company, I saw our first logistics solution, something that took us about 5 years to develop, 2.5 years to develop, and $5 million of money to develop. I saw that logistics solution turn into something that was essentially free and better than our original solution in the period of about, call it 12 years. And I started to think, okay, technology is moving into the base layer of everything, and it's bringing this efficiency to everything we do. Why aren't things getting cheaper? And that took me down a road of curiosity, and eventually to writing The Price of Tomorrow, where I described what would happen when you had these two giant forces that were exactly opposite colliding into each other. One driven by productivity, which would be deflationary, and it was all of our ideas, where we wouldn't use a new idea unless it gave us value. So that if you just kind of noodle that for a second, that is why technology is deflationary. So it's supposed to free our time. It's supposed to deliver us more value, but it is in a system. It's against a system that must destroy our value. It must. We live in an inflationary system that must rob our time and keep us on a hamster wheel, moving faster and faster, all in the name of protecting more jobs, all in the name of paying back debt that can't be repaid. And so when I realized that what the world that my kids would grow up in would look very different than the world I grew up in, I decided to write the Price of Tomorrow, kind of to bring attention to that core issue.
And that was one of the fascinating things I think you explored in the book, that the systems in place that were designed were created to have endless inflation, and that was the way we were meant to grow, or at least by design of the system, that was how we were meant to grow. And yet technology by design is meant to disrupt and break these systems in place, and it has done so repeatedly over the course of history. One of the best examples you cite both in the book as well as in your most recent article was the advent of the digital camera and the way Kodak handled that. And we've seen that sort of transpire across, I think, any sort of industry that now is technologically adept, with the exception of our money. And we will get into the Bitcoin of it because this is, of course, a Bitcoin show. But I want to just talk about, examples that you've noticed in which technology has attempted to get involved or disrupt a current system in place, but that current system was so rigid and almost refused to accept the technology until finally it broke in and just it made no sense to not use technology.
Yeah. So what you just asked there is important because it's in everything. It's in absolutely everything. It's how you actually create value. You go up against it. You see the intersection of technology. You time the intersection of technology where technology is going to make that difference. And if you're right and you design something that is way more useful for people, they move to your new system, to the new product, service, anything, and it moves to and it destroys a monopoly. And a monopoly's reaction to that is always the same. A monopoly is designed, and one thing I'm going to just touch on here is I saw this firsthand in my company that effectively I pivoted 3 times and created massive value on the backside of the pivot. And when you're a 10-person company pivoting, it's easy. When you're a 50-person company pivoting, it's harder. When you're a 350-person company pivoting to what would deliver value, I underestimated the time that would take. And here's why I underestimated the time. Even though everybody believed that the new path was the right path, you had to recreate an entire team to take the new path, and then everybody would go back to their desks and work on the old business. And there was no way so most of the time in the business was protecting the old business. And that means the transition is really difficult. What I found interesting with Steve Jobs and the way he ran that business was he always isolated the new from the existing. And those people were under confidentiality agreements. They were locked in a different building. They were completely separated from the existing mothership until such time that the new was able to be launched to the market. Because the organization that does something else is inhibited to do the new because it destroys everything that they do. And it's just a normal reaction that people try to protect. So Kodak invented the digital camera, and the founder of the digital camera tried twice, I think his name's Sasson, tried twice to the executive to say, here's how much value we could create from this. And the organization doing something different blocked it all the time. And an interesting insight into that is what an organization does, well predictable, to be able to stop that innovation. What they're doing is protecting the people closest to the organization. All in Kodak's case, all their distributors, film producers, all of their relationships, which is quite predictable. Well, the technology delivers value to people that are furthest away from the organization, whether that's new entrepreneurs wanting to create that technology to create a different way of exposing value, or it's users using that value. That's why the opportunity exists. And that same thing happens with Netflix Blockbuster. It happens in every single industry all the time. And once you start moving faster, once you deliver that type of value to end users, now you can create in a different way. The thing that protected the monopoly actually kills the monopoly, because their greatest strength turns into their greatest liability. I'll use another example. Sears' greatest strength, all of the stores, turned it into its greatest liability against Amazon. And so all of the capital costs, the supply chain of servicing those stores was more expensive than Amazon's way of delivering value. The stores couldn't bring on millions of products because they had limited shelf space. Amazon could bring on hundreds of millions of products. And so the thing that actually gives the opportunity to the new value, if that person is right, or if that entrepreneur is right, also destroys the existing monopoly, because the advantage shifts really quickly. And what's happening to money right now at the highest level that we could imagine, which informs everything else we're building, that's what's happening to money right now. But we've never seen that happen to money, so we would not be used to seeing that happen. And remember what I just said: if everyone in the system, in the existing system, cannot see kind of the new innovation or the change in people's attitudes once they're using the new innovation and how fast they change, then they're very unlikely to see how to move. The reaction is pretty typical across every single industry that you look at.
I want to, if we can explore the present day fiat money that we have, and just on that for a moment, what is the value that was promised when the world post World War II decided to use the US dollar as this global reserve currency? And then again in the 70s, when we removed ourselves from this gold standard, what was the value proposition in those iterations of money?
Yeah, and remember, if you could, I've posted this a couple times, but if it's possible that humans could manipulate money for their gain against somebody else's pain for other humans, history says they will. So not they might, they will. So if a currency is able to be manipulated, it will be manipulated. And so the design, with the U.S. kind of being in the strongest position after World War II, the design of the monetary system had gold backing against Bretton Woods and the US dollar. And even Keynes, who many people completely, I think he would roll over in his grave if he actually saw what's actually been done under his name, because he advocated for a bancor that would be more like a neutral reserve asset, seeing what could happen with if a currency held a reserve currency and tied to gold, because then when U.S. went off the gold reserve, essentially they pushed the pain, they defaulted, and they pushed the pain to all of the other countries, and then in reaction to that created the petrodollar system, which effectively meant U.S. got free energy, everybody else paid for energy. And to get that free energy, they needed a military industrial complex to make sure that shipping lanes and countries stayed in line. Because if you didn't sell your energy in US dollars, you were outside of a system. So you couldn't transact in the system, or you were invaded. And so that system, and while it had many negative repercussions, it actually drove the world order, and it drove kind of a lot of people out of poverty, and it was a system, but that worked for some time. But again, it requires manipulation, and greater manipulation all the time. So today we live in that system where 2% inflation isn't enough to pay that back. And what it means is other nations need to sell their labor, their reserves, in something that needs to devalue by 8 or 10% a year. And so that monetary system is breaking down again. And when you say the design of the system, these things just kind of start. So yes, Bretton Woods was a design of the system, but there was until Bitcoin, there was always a design of a system requiring a hard asset, and then a debt-based system on top of that to be able to create velocity of money, to be able to transact in. With Bitcoin, which is very different, the velocity of money is in the network itself, and so you don't need the debt. You don't need the giant credit-based system that always gets away on itself to be able to transact, or to be able to pass value in the new system.
Now, I want to discuss shifting to this new system, and I love the Blockbuster Netflix analogy. If you're not aware, Netflix literally went to Blockbuster, offered the entire company to Blockbuster. Blockbuster scoffed, said no, and you know how history played out from there.
So just before you go there,
Sure.
keep in mind, because people say that, oh, what dummies, right? What the executives at Blockbuster were dummies, but all it is a slight change. And at that time, Netflix was a CD delivery business, delivering movies through the mail and delivering them back, and it wasn't a very good business. What changed is technology moved faster, and a dial-up modem or that would take forever to download a movie changed, and you could stream a movie, and that changed everything. So again, what the executives at Blockbuster, just like the executives in any industry, just like the people that are running the Federal Reserve, just like your elected leaders all over the world, the real mistake is not understanding the trend to technology and what would come next as a result of things moving faster. Not what existed right when they were deciding on that transaction. It was missing how fast technology was moving, and that speed rate of technology moving would change everything else. Sorry.
No, please do not apologize, Jeff. I've learned so much listening to you explain things and reading your writings. But I want to use that model of how the value proposition of technology caught up and people saw the viability of, hey, for me, it was I transitioned from LimeWire to Netflix. That was my transition. The value proposition of Netflix made it so it was more accessible for me. As we see the value proposition of Bitcoin increase, as we see opportunities to use, interact, and even just hold and store our Bitcoin, all the way to using it as a pricing mechanism, would these count as an increase in value proposition so that it feels as though the right path to global mass adoption would be a more organic, natural effect rather than court orders or issuances saying, or decrees saying Bitcoin is now our nation's currency, rather than, oh, we've seen this work. Why don't we use it within our community and let it expand further from there? No different than what we saw in El Zonte and El Salvador, to a degree.
Yeah. And that's exactly what's happening. And it's why with Ego Death Capital, we're investing on layer 2, layer 3 solutions on top of Bitcoin. But if you actually go back in time, and this is what I wrote in the latest article, Finding Signal in a Noisy World, what I explored there is why it would be normal that people would kind of create all these altcoins and scams, and why it would be normal that a whole bunch of people would build on top of that because they hadn't done the work on top of the base layer, and they didn't see another alternative to deliver value. So they thought, okay, I'll just copy this with a little tweak and so it has more block size or something like that, and I can scale it and create an industry, and why that would fail. So so I recently had a call from one of the major VCs, and that VC said to a general partner there and said, listen, we would invest in literally anything that you are investing in. We'll follow on because you're right on the ecosystem, you're right on Bitcoin as a protocol technology, and you're also right that we invested in a whole bunch of these things that would never work long term. But we didn't realize it at the time. But there was no way to invest on top of Bitcoin because the ecosystem wasn't in layers yet. So it wasn't able to it didn't look like it didn't look like a protocol in a stacked solution. And so remember, TCP/IP came out DARPA in the late 60s, but it wasn't until HTTP layer 4 in 1989 that was the advent of the World Wide Web and everything we see today. And so those layers harden over time, and they become, because when you're building that protocol type of layer, and you don't see what's going to be available until the next part of that layer of the protocol is is developed, which brings a whole bunch more value and a whole bunch more innovation to the space. So Bitcoin through Lightning, Liquid, a whole bunch of other different layer 2, layer 3 solutions, FEDI, is turning into that layered approach protocol layer. And there's a world of opportunity coming. Now, I sit in a fortunate seat that I get to see what's coming because I get to play in a seat. We've already looked at over 300 companies, and we haven't announced the next 2 yet, but we have lead term sheets on 2 more coming, and a whole bunch more in the pipeline that we're investing in. And so you see with the ideas and the entrepreneurs that are building on top of this that literally change everything about this network. So you have network effects of Bitcoin itself as a store of value being reinforced by network effect of Lightning as a payment mechanism. And when Taro comes out, and a whole bunch of FEDI comes out, a whole bunch of these that 1 + 1 + 1 equals 37, because you have all of these new ideas that can now sit on top of in a protocol and all be from a base layer of sound money. So it literally changed. In fact, it'd be so difficult for governments to turn that off, because by turning it off or to stopping it, what they're essentially saying is we don't want to participate for our citizens in the future of the internet. It would be like what it looks like in North Korea. So they can stop themselves from doing it, and they can in turn hurt their citizens, share of the future growth of the world, but they can't stop the network.
First off, I absolutely love, and I sent it in our chat as well, Ego Death might be one of the best names of a company just ever. Absolutely for a VC firm, but up there as a top 5 company name all time. I'm asking this because I have listened to you give this explanation on countless shows, and I cannot ever explain it as well as you can, but I want to explore 2 topics. Firstly, we touched a little bit just now on just the different layers that both the internet protocol has as well as Bitcoin network. Could we dive a little bit deeper and give a more nuanced example so people can really start to see and connect the dots of what the base layer of the Bitcoin is as it relates back to the base layer of the internet, as well as the error protocols that I swear to you, Jeff, I've listened to you explain this maybe close to 100 times, and I can't even do it half as well as you. So for the sake of my friends who are watching, can you help also explain how those 400 errors that were built into the internet's protocol layer help to explain what Bitcoin is and why it is actually the internet's money?
Maybe. So we've never had something decentralized and secure. So I mean, never in history have humans had decentralization and security together. So what we did throughout time is created institutions to protect us from the institutions, and then rule of law to protect us from those institutions getting out of hands. And why we did that is because the free market is the best way to deliver value to society, because there's more shots on net, more ideas to be able to deliver value. And this has a really important point into CBDCs. Ask me that afterwards and why that's important. But first, we've never had decentralization and security together. And most people on this call would know how that works with Bitcoin. But if you don't, if you went through the finding signal and a noise, you can see why that it is so solid, why it can't be changed, and why it's very novel. Never had it. So we created things like the Magna Carta, or the Declaration of Independence, or the Bill of Rights, where we enshrined rights to citizens to protect them from the state getting too big. But what ends up happening over and over, and so now carry that forward. Everywhere that was done, where citizens had more power over the state, you had thriving economies. US is a really great example, founded on hard money, the Declaration of Independence, and enshrined a free market attitude, which had more shots on net, delivered value to society, and became a world superpower, a global superpower as a result of that. And you had people all over the world wanting to come to the US to be able to build on to that, because they were free to actually create value. But what ends up happening, because money is more powerful than laws, is laws change over time to protect money. And you can see that that's true, because if it weren't true, then the places with the most broken money would have the best laws. And so over time, because money is more powerful than laws, and the people that get closer and closer to the money printing design the laws, and they change the laws, and they lobby to create the laws, and they can hold up laws because they have more money. They can essentially take people off the system to be able to change the laws. Money being broken always changes that relationship to the free market over time. And those things that we decide, those laws that we decide to protect us from the state, end up going away, and economies fail as a result. So when you have something that's decentralized and secure by design, and it's never existed before, and we always needed to create these institutions to be able to protect us, then you have to also, as a byproduct, look back through history, and you have to say, if we've never had this before, then all of our historical biases were on different systems. And that, what I just said there, is a really big change. So now if you have that decentralized and security together as a base layer, now in layers, you can build more functionality in layers that doesn't sacrifice the core layer. Everything reinforces to that core layer. And when people say Bitcoin fixes this, I know it's a catch-all and everything else, but it literally fixes everything else. It aligns it aligns human nature to the best in us rather than the worst in us.
I love that. And I know you don't mean it in jest, but that conversation or that statement of, Bitcoin fixes this, Bitcoin fixes that, Bitcoin solves so many of the world's problems. I think you're alluding to the fact that so many of the world's problems are caused by this manipulated and corrupt money. And if we fix the money, we can fix the world in turn. I want to just give you the opportunity to poke at a little bit of some of the things that are corrupt with our system. We pulled up Dewan Hodl's comment where you were essentially describing the current system, and it essentially sounded very similar to a proof of stake model, which we won't bring up the other cryptocurrency that is apparently going to switch by tomorrow. P, just a reminder, if that happens, you are eating shoe leather. You better not go into hiding and disappear on us. But Jeff, what are some of the things in this current system where you see it and you smack your head and ask yourself, how are you the person in charge of the money? How are you doing this if this is so wrong? What are those types of actions?
And you've heard me talk about this. It's a system problem, and people are in the system, and they think and they think they're doing good, or they actually. There's evil in any system. There's great. Most people are biased towards the good, but ultimately this is a system problem that can't be solved by the system. Because let's just explore what that would look like solving it by the system. I could have stopped my book at "Technology is deflationary!" ! And asked and because I can't believe people can actually hear that, not disagree with it, completely agree with it, and then concurrently go and say, okay, but we should live in a system that's designed around inflation. And that's the break, because most people you ask believe and if their belief, if they'll reinforce what their belief is, they'll keep on giving power to that. They believe that a productive economy requires a 2% inflation, or 5% inflation, or 3% inflation. They believe that a productive economy requires inflation, and they've never done the work to say why. Why is that true? And I would grant that a debt-based economy requires inflation at a greater and greater layer all the time, because otherwise the debt collapses and you have nothing. And if the entire economy is built on that credit, that the money in your bank isn't actually your money, it's a credit note, then the entire economy fails if you allow deflation. But that is a different problem than technology is deflationary, or why is it a requirement that we lose money every year to live in a productive society? And if you just focus there, forget all of the other nonsense, you realize that there's an error code in the existing money that can't solve this problem. Then you go to this a solution set and you say, what could solve that problem? What could transition us where the abundance gained from our technology is broadly distributed? Because what's happening right now is that abundance gained from technology, every time things drop in price or are supposed to drop in price, you have to print more money to be able to make them to offset that lower price. So you have to concentrate that wealth in fewer hands by design, instead of letting prices fall. But it all comes from a system problem. Now, but I am glad you poked on it. Now go to that system problem and you say, okay, I'm in the system. I'm Chairman Powell. What do I do? What do you do? So if you keep tightening, policy, what I just described, that credit will eventually roll over and it'll start collapsing. And that collapse will go faster and faster and faster. And joblessness, and then house prices, and every price will keep on falling until there's a massive liquidity injection. But the massive liquidity injection is essentially stealing people's time and concentrating that wealth in fewer and fewer hands at the same time. And this is a global system. So what would you do if you're him? Or what would you do if you're anybody in that system? Because I'm sure they don't want everybody to starve to death, as every bank fails, every system fails. So you need a transmission mechanism that slowly transitions something from one side to the other. And what's happening with Bitcoin is it's that transmission mechanism that is repricing everything over time. And that repricing, so I suspect it's everything in the world is going to be divided by 21 million, as Canute says, but it's going to take a whole bunch of time to get there. So if you're living in the existing world, measuring price of Bitcoin in the existing world, or measuring your house in the existing world, it will look like your house's value is going up. But what's actually happening is to Bitcoin, house values will fall to the utility value.
You know, there was that chart that I don't think we have on hand of when the Fed released a report about, well, if you price a dozen eggs in Bitcoin, this is what it looks like. And you could actually see the deflationary aspect of pricing some good in Bitcoin with a deflationary money actually drove the prices lower, versus the fiat dollar amount continued to see that inflation compound no less and see those prices rise. You mentioned that you saw the world that your kids were going to live in being so vastly different than the world that you live in. I'm curious, what are some lessons you are instilling in your kids today to prepare them for this changing tomorrow?
Well, they're really close to, obviously, Bitcoin, Lightning, everything else, that ecosystem, and as a byproduct, I bring them to a bunch of the different different events around the world and meet other Bitcoiners, so they understand. But they're also close to a whole bunch of my friends that, quite honestly, live in the other system, and this isn't the thing they talk about all the time because they don't know what's happening. So what do I teach them? I teach them curiosity. I teach them that they're responsible for the way the way the world looks to them. That it's mostly their ideas, and if you don't like the way the world looks, it's a mirror reflection showing back at you. So it's change you, not the world. But I try to teach. In other words, I teach them accountability in that, so that they can create any world they want. They can do whatever they want. They don't need money. You could literally live, if you wanted to move somewhere off grid. You could literally live for not very much money if that's what you wanted to do, and be really happy. It's our own view of the world that reinforces back against us. And so I just want them to be happy in the overall world we're living in. That's easier to say than it's done. It's actually, I have to ask myself the same question. We could be on Twitter and we could say, we could be in a little silo ourselves and feedback and reinforce our own thoughts by people who reinforce us all the time. And we could be more and more polarizing to other people that we like. And what I realized is there's nothing I can do from the existing system breaking down. There's nothing I can do. This existing system will break down, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And that's going to create a whole bunch of pain that it's easy to go to a dark place and spend all your time in a dark place because of the pain that's going to cause. The only thing I can do is spend all of my time influencing the world I want to see. In fact, why I started Ego Death is because of that, because I wanted to spend my time with the builders of the future rather than where we were going in the existing system. So that's and I hope that they'll do the same thing.
There's something that you've been touching on a little bit, and I do appreciate, and it's this idea that the systems in place sort of have guided people, and the decisions that we've seen be made almost have these like this framework that we work around and work within. I'm curious though on your thoughts of accountability, because as we witness this system crumbling before our eyes, eventually it will break. How are you looking for accountability to the people who maybe participated in that system and benefited, or even help exaggerate the pains to a point where you could point a finger and say this was actually a far greater cause to the system deteriorating?
First, if you realize, so here's a really simple analogy to be able to do this. If you were an executive at Sears from 1995 to 2010 versus you were an executive at Amazon, you saw two totally different worlds. And in the one world, it got worse and worse and worse and worse for you, and then your business died. And on the other, it got better and better and better. That's what's happening here. It's just at a more profound level than a company level, Sears and Amazon. It's at a base layer of money, and that also describes, and not everybody's going to see it. Like the free market ensures that not everybody's going to see it. An asymmetric bet requires that the majority of people don't see it. So this is an asymmetric bet, but it's not just an asymmetric bet. It's a protocol layer technology that we can't see what's going to be available until the next layer is developed. So that's why it's hard to see. People are looking backwards at this instead of forwards at this. Same thing that Blockbuster did with Netflix. They're looking backwards instead of forwards. So if you understand where this is going, that creates tons of opportunity and a really exciting world to be a part of. And as more and people understand that, now I'm going to pause there, because here's what ends up happening. When people move to fear or scarcity mindset, their minds constrict and they can't see all of the options in front of them. They typically make worse and worse decisions and they lock in, and they think it's the world conspiring against them, and it's them conspiring against the world, because they don't have a framework to be able to understand what's happening. When you can actually just be logical and say, okay, where do I want this? Like, even if how I'm talking about this, okay, propose me another solution that works as well as Bitcoin, and I'd be open to it. I'm going to look at it, but I haven't seen anything. So I hear people say, we won't let the existing system collapse, and all the power that resides in this existing system, I'm not going to come into Bitcoin because of that, because of that power, because one day they're going to shut it off. And they hate the existing system, yet they're giving it more power by making that decision. And each choice, they're going to make that choice. But more and more people are starting to come over. More and more products are being built on top of this. More and more value is going to be built on top of this. And it's going to, yes, the people that are early into this and creating value on top of it are going to create a whole bunch of wealth. But more so, they're actually, every single person that's doing it is actually creating wealth for all humanity by doing so. So they're building the bridge that more and more people can walk across, and people will walk across that in due time.
I just want to echo
Please.
something you just said that I think is so profound, and I think risks not being acknowledged as such, that when people are operating in a scarcity mindset, their options in their own mind narrow significantly. And I think it's so significant and profound because that is the mindset that, in my opinion, the majority of the broader media and the government messaging around the world that we are in today is focused on creating. It's focused on trying to create a scarcity mindset in people so that they are more willing to accept these Orwellian restrictions.
Yeah, and now, P, if you go to what I said I'd come back to afterwards. Imagine a CBDC. So just imagine other nations trusting China's CBDC. Probably not going to be the reserve currency of the world. It's illogical to think that every other nation is going to trust a new nation currency to do that. So now imagine a number of CBDCs. What that means is, because the manipulation of currency, the only reason it can continue to exist is through coercion. It needs to destroy the free markets, and it needs to drive coercion as part of the plan. So misinformation is part of it, whether real or implied. There's a whole bunch of people, and they might tell themselves this: we have to do it if you look at Klaus and that whole game, we have to do this to protect all those stupid people from starving. They might actually believe it, and we're only in this position because money was manipulated in the first place, that we get around to be able to destroy the free market, and then the free market of ideas. My book, for instance, was a shot against that, where it just simply says, why don't prices fall when technology makes them fall? Which is an entirely different idea than the way of the world today. But if you just keep going and saying, if we couldn't see how we would change from, for me, I use this example often. I used to use a BlackBerry, and I used that BlackBerry, and I was guaranteed I would never change my BlackBerry. I loved my BlackBerry. I loved my buttons on my BlackBerry. And so when the iPhone came out and everybody said I thought it was a toy, and then I saw it, and immediately it changed. So let's call it 3 years. Steve Jobs is developing the iPhone before I knew. All the while, everything is good, and he has this idea to launch that I couldn't see, and then I couldn't understand when it was there. It was like a 0 to 1 moment. When it was there, my mind changed instantly. And now I chose something new that gave me more value. And that new value changed Apple, and it changed an entire industry, and BlackBerry faded off into the distance as a result. So now, if I can't see my own change, and I'm pretty good at understanding where technology is going, timing and everything else, and I can't see my own change or what was coming to inspire that change 3 years before that change happened. How is it that any central authority could decide all of our actions before they're there? And so what you'll see in that is why a CBDC will never work, because it says that central control can understand all of our actions before it's there. It's impossible.
Now it's that last statement that I both love and want to explore, and it's the fact that a CBDC cannot work. I love your explanation of if people can corrupt money, they will. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. But with all of these in mind, I unfortunately, and I think all of us would be in agreement that the attempts to create CBDCs will not stop, nor will the attempts to create other forms of cryptocurrencies. And these attempts will continue to stop.
Yeah.
I'm curious, are these explorations of this form of technology any way hindering both the growth of Bitcoin and the legitimacy of Bitcoin?
I think it accelerates it. I think it accelerates it all over the world. I think this is unstoppable. It's inevitable. It's going to be messy on the way through. And if you understand how much everything is mispriced in the world and the control structures to misprice everything, that being on the wrong side of that fence at any given time, it's going to be chaotic. It's going to be really chaotic. But I suspect this is inevitable just because the game theory and mechanics into this and all of the value creation that people will not give up. When you deliver a value that is that much more valuable to society, people change, just like I did with my iPhone. Now, remember, the iPhone, 10 years before that, there was a Palm Pilot that was similar, but it wasn't the timing that were, and not everybody changed. Today, what's happening with what's coming on top of these layers, on top of Bitcoin, or Bitcoin alone is a protocol, but on top of that, it's literally unstoppable.
And my next question, again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I want to figure out where is the weakness in Bitcoin. And one of my fears right now is a lot of the regulatory efforts. Do you pay any of this any mind? Do you care what a politician does or say? I feel like Bitcoiners are all across this spectrum. Some are so passionate, while others couldn't give a flying fuck who the president is or what they say.
Yeah, all of these things are probably more nuanced, and just like I don't have all the best ideas all the time, other people are saying it their way, bringing other people on their way. But what I will say is the leaders will change too. We give our leaders too much power and think they know better everywhere else because we give them power, and we make this opaque institution. We give it so much power by saying they'll do this, what if they do, when we have all the power? Just more people just walk across the bridge. I'm going to highlight this. So when I was in Oslo, I could not believe that all of these freedom fighters are talking about the exact same thing in their different countries, and if they got elected, it would look exactly the same. Because they'd have to manipulate money further. It would just be a different face on that problem, and it would look exactly the same. And so I actually was a little bit, I would say, coming away from that and understanding that some of the people that should know most why Bitcoin is important know least. I was disheartened, and then we were and then we went up to Lofoten with this small group of Bitcoiners and some of those activists all over the world, and the rightful president of Venezuela said after that, he said, "Here I was with all of these followers, thinking that I could make change." And on the front line of this change, he was jailed. He was in solitary confinement for 5 years. and coming out and all of these followers that and I was cut off from the system, from money. And so here I am on the front lines thinking this, and then seeing other countries, activists in their countries on different front lines, and then seeing Bitcoin on their own front lines. And I didn't realize that it's the same front line. It was always about money. And unless that's fixed, there is no solve to the system. So when you can start to activate people that see what it's really about, that have all of these, and they start to move over and they start to bring more and more people, it just accelerates. And that's why you're seeing the network effects on Bitcoin and Lightning and the entire ecosystem accelerate. It's so going back to giving the state too much power. You give the state too much power because you think you don't have a voice. You think you don't have, and you don't do the things you'll do. So I think they say 3% of a population stands up against something, stands up against the state. The state's over. But never, very rarely does 3% of a population stand up against. Most people hide from the state. In this case, you don't have to hide. You just move. You just move, and you defund the state by moving, and you give more power to the network.
I want to, if we can't explore.
Can I just, because you just leave yourself up for a sec, but also those people in the old monopolies, in the old they age out, and new people replace them. And if there's a massive amount of younger people that understand this and why that's more important, the more people that start to understand it elect new leaders, and things change. And so we get, I say the broader we, because people want Bitcoin to go up to 100,000 tomorrow. They're in this, what's going on right now? What's the thing? What is the one person who's going to change this? What is the one person who I bring on that changes everything? And it doesn't look like that. It's an emergent network that gets stronger and stronger and stronger, while the existing network gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And that's actually what you want in the network transition. Yes, it's going to be messy. Yes, there's going to be, 2 years ago, I wrote something called The Greatest Game. And if you follow what's happening in The Greatest Game from the existing system, it's just playing out exactly like I wrote would happen in that article. And so, yes, this is an emergent system. It's early. It's an asymmetric bet, but it's way more than an asymmetric bet of money. Everything on Bitcoin, everything against Bitcoin will fall in price forever. If you're saying Bitcoin will rise in price forever, what you're actually stepping in the trap of is falling into the error code of the existing system.
I'm curious, and if you can't comment, just given your closeness to what happened in Canada back in January, I do want to just discuss a little bit of how a group of citizens who maybe weren't even aware or using Bitcoin had Bitcoin almost forced as a use case to them. And as we see around the world, more and more issues pop up in countries that are considered developed nations, as well as those that are considered still developing. Do you anticipate more instances where citizens are going to be forced into Bitcoin as a life raft, or do you think people will continue to organically discover this?
So in Oslo, so I think many people out here know, I was on the freedom fight. I was an advocate for the freedom fight. I held a key in the Bitcoin wallet, so I was part of that with Greg Foss and others. And I said yes, not because the trucker specifically. I said yes because it's our right to stand up and peacefully protest. It's a right, and if you actually abuse that right by taking it away, it's a really bad thing for humanity. And then when I saw what happened to me and others, I thought my bank account was going to be frozen. I probably had by 70% of the population believed that it was the right thing to do from the government, because the media is the government, and the messaging. So you had the majority coming after those people for standing up for individual rights and freedoms, which I found so egregious. Now, that was really hard to go through a time where all your companies are facing an attack vector. Me personally, potentially being excluded from a financial market that for doing nothing wrong, in retrospect, and changing the laws in retrospect afterwards, and saying that we need emergency powers, and then take people that had donated before and say they're included in this. So we crossed some real red lines there in Canada. But what I didn't realize, and I didn't realize it until I went to Oslo, where Ludmila came up to me, and she was in the Ukraine, and she said, "What you did saved countless lives in the Ukraine." And I went like, "You're just really perplexed." And so she went on to this story about when Canada did that, and all nations looked at it, this could happen in Canada, it could happen everywhere. It got us really thinking more about what Bitcoin could do to help be a positive force. And then when Russia invaded, what we did is we just blueprinted exactly what you did, and we had Bitcoin donations, we had and as a result, we had hard hats, medical supplies, and vests out to the field the same day, versus all the bank accounts, all the banks being locked. So and that's probably, you never know the impact you're going to make. You never know the impact. So do the right thing. Just do the right thing. And so that was a really powerful moment. But that powerful moment that I was not expecting, because it didn't look powerful inside my family and what that looked like. But it was a really powerful moment to hear what ended up happening in other parts of the world as a result, and more adoption to Bitcoin as a result.
Thank you for that. And Jeff, seriously, thank you for a lot of the work that you do intentionally, and sometimes, as you very quickly learn, unintentionally. Like, I've learned so much from you, and this is our first interaction in person, and I'm even learning even more just in this conversation. So I'm going to say thank you a lot, just as a heads up. I'm that kind of guy.
Hey, it takes a village, and
much.
all of the people in this, what you guys do, this community is something so special, and broadly the community. We all think about it differently. We all show up differently, but it takes everybody in doing this. And again, I think everybody in doing this is building the bridge for everybody else to walk across.
Absolutely. I want to ask about Ego Death a little bit. And I know you guys were instrumental in funding Fediments. And I'd love to just hear what you and the team at Ego Death saw in Fediments for the potential of its future, and what you guys look for in other potential investment vehicles.
So in Fedi specifically, now remember, Fediment is the open source. Fedi is the company on top that's designing a company value out of that. And there could be hundreds of competitors to Fedi. So we'll see how they do. But what I saw is I saw a leader in Obi that I really liked. I really liked his integrity. I liked his values. I spent a lot of time with him in Norway, and it was actually on the plane back from Lofoten that I said to him, so that wasn't a company. I don't think he had thought about creating a company there yet, but I was frustrated because I thought we needed 1 billion people on this network as fast as possible, and what would be some of the tooling that would to allow billions of people to come on, because I was frustrated with the rate of even people who needed it most. If you look at those freedom activists, that they didn't understand it because it was complex and holding keys and how that would look. So I was pushing a conversation with actually the freedom activists, and then everybody was sleeping on the plane, and I was willing to look at any sort of vehicle to to fund to be able to drive that adoption. And Obi joined us at the front of the plane, and that's where the idea to create Fedi was born. And I've actually said this to a number of the LPs in the fund. You don't actually know some of these things that are emerging. We're really excited about two more of the things that we're funding shortly, announcements shortly. Really excited, but you don't know some of the things that are going to emerge and how those will emerge until you actually get deep into the weeds and say, okay, how could this look? If there's everybody's competing, let's say on wallets, and you're going to have a red ocean of all these wallets, what comes in? Do you want to just compete just on the wallet, or what else is a transitionary layer that actually creates more value to bring people on the network faster? So, and in that, I've just been blown away by all of the ideas. It's just it's really exciting. Obviously, we can't fund everyone. We're gonna miss some really good ones as well. There's other great VCs in this space, but it's a wildly exciting time to be a builder in this ecosystem and being able to support entrepreneurs in this ecosystem.
P, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, excuse me. I was just going to say for the audience briefly, as you said, Jeff, Fediment is the technology. There's the company Fedi, which is super interesting. I'm really, really excited that you guys are supporting that company and that initiative. There's an amazing website that I would encourage anyone who is curious about what Fediment is and why it is such an exciting technology, and that is fedimint.org. That's FEDI mint.org. And I'll just say very briefly that, as Odell says, the people will use the technology that solves their needs the most simply. And so there's this huge spectrum of custody solutions that exist within the Bitcoin space. We talk about this a lot on this show, the dangers of keeping your Bitcoin on an exchange, because again, if you keep your Bitcoin on an exchange, you don't actually own any Bitcoin. All you have is an IOU, and you are dependent on and trusting that exchange to give you that Bitcoin. And as we've seen recently, they don't always do that. And so Fediment is this really, really cool technology that creates that allows you to explore the middle ground between being like an individual who has full self-custody using like multi-sig and, all this stuff. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have sort of, an exchange, and Fediment allows you to do things like leverage existing trust structures and community in really, really powerful ways. And most importantly, with the work that Fedi and others are doing, it makes it possible in an extremely intuitive and simple way. So I think it's definitely going to be one of the primary technologies that allows us to scale Bitcoin to billions of people.
I also think because it's not all on chain, as Moore does that, it's a lightning scaler as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So when some of these things come together, they create more and more value for all of the different participants in the system. And when you think about how this is going to be used, one of the other things people might want to do is on the Telegram group, follow Fediment, and you'll see just countless ideas. I can't keep up to it. The ideas of, but what could come next on top of this.
It's like it almost sounds, and I am the least technically savvy person of our trio by far, but it sounds to me like it's almost like a little branch, and we can build further off of the Bitcoin network, but as well can build specific solutions for Fedi and Fediment products, or Fediment, the Fediment network. Is that an accurate way of assessing that?
I don't know if I like it as a branch, more as a layer, as a layer that comes back down to the Bitcoin network. So everything is through those on and off ramps, everything comes back down to the Bitcoin network.
Fair enough. I do not listen to a word I say when it comes to technical stuff. Listen to these two, not me.
You're too humble. You're too humble. Check out fediment.org though. They've got some really, really well drawn illustrations that just like basically define that sort of spectrum that I was just talking about and articulate it in a really, really compelling way.
Jeff, I wanted to take the rest of our time, unless Pete, did you have anything else on this topic to go down? I wanted to take the rest of our time specifically highlighting one of the chapters in The Price of Tomorrow, which, again, if you have not yet read The Price of Tomorrow, you have homework. Do not come back to this stream until you have at least ordered it. I don't want to see you in the chat, Geekcock, unless you have ordered Price of Tomorrow. You've been getting called out a lot this week. There's one chapter in particular where you talked about the future of energy and as how technology is going to impact the way we interact with energy. And you spent a lot of time talking about the technology around solar and how it's not yet there, but you actually very excellently pointed out the way technology has already deflated the energy cost of solar. Throughout our conversation, it almost feels like what we're bearing witness to in that scope of things is the current iteration of solar technology, to use an analogy, is when Netflix was mailing DVDs to everyone. And they haven't figured out that next iteration. The technology has not quite caught up yet. But eventually, if and when it does, it will be so disruptive that our current systems in place should, in theory, shift accordingly. Do you feel the same way?
So one of the things, if I said I could have changed something in that book, not that anything was wrong with solar, and there's still lots of stuff happening with solar as well. But I wish I had explored nuclear and other forms of energy in this. Broadly, what I was talking about is technology is in everything, and you can't see it until until it's there providing value. And so even in that, what you'd say today, energy prices going through the roof, and so people believe that those energy prices are going through the roof because of scarce resources, but that's actually not true. Where they're going through the roof is because of manipulated money. Because we've had more and more, we have fracking, we have more energy at lower prices today, and more technology integrating into energy all the time. And so from a system design, what that means is unless you let that abundance flow to society, you have to create more and more money to make prices go up for forever. And you've probably heard me say this before, but abundance and money creates scarcity everywhere else, and scarcity and money creates abundance, because what the free market does is goes to solve those problems that are most solvable. Instead of and so it doesn't matter whether it's solar, fusion, something, but we can expect that human ingenuity will create more and more value in energy all over the place. And Bitcoin specifically actually provides a floor for that energy pricing and chases clean and abundant energy all over the world, moving us to a Kardashev type 1 planet by creating an economic structure to chase cheap energy. The only thing that stops that is our monetary system. So that should be, as we do that, and just do a thought experiment. Let's say we come up with fusion reactors that is that you have complete clean renewable energy, and it happens tomorrow. Let's just do, I don't know, it's a crazy thought experiment, and it's all over the world, and you have an abundant energy for free, effectively. What does the existing system do? Because that free brings down prices of every single thing that uses energy, which is everything. And now you have massive deflation, and that means the existing financial system requires way more easing to block that deflation from reaching society. So out of that thought experiment, you can see exactly what's happening. It's being robbed from us through higher prices everywhere. And so in the book specifically, trying to tie a whole bunch of broad themes together into a narrative that was happening, you have to sacrifice depth in some of those to be able to have the breadth to be able to understand. But so I if I was to do it again, I would have expanded the energy chapter.
No, definitely. I think especially over the course of this year, everyone has gone from being an armchair economist now an armchair energy expert, or at least I am. Um, I want to remind everyone we have about 15 minutes before we wrap, but please, please, please like and subscribe down below here on YouTube, up there on Rumble. One day I'll figure this out. And if you are listening to this on any of our podcast platforms, please be sure to subscribe to check out all of our incredible interviews and our guests as well. Jeff, I'm curious as we see this global energy negotiation, the impending winter that Europe is going to deal with, the moves being made by the US to prepare itself for another leg up in gas prices, or at least I believe there will be a new leg up. What are you paying most attention to? What is the noise in all of this signal? Or sorry, other way around. What is the signal in all of this noise?
It's a financial system. So you can expect that the next step of this is people are going to retreat and go into their own backyard, and they're going to blame others. So if you think about a financial system for the US, and it's not entirely one-sided against this is nuance, but the periphery used to be Africa and South America. That was US's periphery, where they would essentially, there was a win for them at the expense of somebody else, and that was their periphery. Well, you can see what's happening with Japan and EU right now. The EU and Japan are the periphery. It's going to be able to protect the US. You're going to have to go inward and sacrifice others. And then in the EU, Germany is going to have to go inward and sacrifice Portugal, Spain, Italy. And this is just, and if they don't, so if they keep on essentially funding Italy and such through Germany taxpayers, then Germany taxpayers will revolt and elect somebody else. So as people care about their own needs, they turn inwards, and it's very easy to blame other people. It's the most likely event. Why I wrote the chapter "Us versus Them" in the book is because when you could predict all of this, you could easily see what was going to happen all over the world as a result of a failing monetary system that could not work. But now even you think about where we are in this cycle right now. So the Fed's tightening, and the Fed's tightening to try to create demand destruction that will turn into a credit crisis. That's what will happen if that keeps on tightening. But that credit crisis will start in other places first. And when Japan's losing the value of their yen and energy prices are exploding, what do Japanese have to pay for energy? And then energy is fundamental in all their industries. What happens to their industries? So you can see the interconnections all over the world. But even so much as, so if they keep tightening, so at some point they'll have to loosen. But as they loosen, they make their geopolitical rivalries stronger. So China gets stronger, Russia gets stronger, and so there is no fix from this from the existing system. There's just no way to fix it from the existing system. You have to have a transition mechanism to a new system. And now you could say some people believe in gold, right, as a transmission mechanism. And what that means is essentially, I could revalue gold. The US has a lot of gold. I could revalue gold and reprice the entire system through that revaluation and say, let's start again. But to do that, then Russia has a lot of gold too, and China has a lot of gold too. So I have to revalue gold with them, and then we all have to agree in the auditing of that gold to build the exact same system. Sorry, I'm going to go over. And then everyone else in the world has to agree to the same thing to be able to do that, to agree to that new order, and then we do the exact same thing again, and we kick the can down the road and we start again. I suspect that isn't going to be the way. It might be tried. People might talk about it, but I suspect that is not going to be the way we get through this. I suspect that technology is the way we get through this, through Bitcoin. I think that as all of these events happen and people have their different ideas on how to revalue that debt and change, those ideas typically are imposed after a victor of a war. They're not negotiated before, especially in the environment that we have. So failing those ideas, you have Bitcoin, a network effect, and most people misunderstand a network effect. You have two network effects with Bitcoin and Lightning reinforcing each other. That is bringing more and more adoption. So I suspect that just if I'm playing probabilities, that is the way the transition is going to happen. Not that there's not going to be a lot of noise on what different ways to solve this from the existing system could solve it. Just like there'd be a lot of noise before Sears died. Just like there'd be a lot of noise before Kodak died. Just like a lot of noise from the existing monopoly on how they're going to stop technology from moving forward.
So a lot of noise from the Fed and the money printers to justify them having control of the money. I know one of the questions that we tend to get a lot over.
Can I just say this really quickly? Isn't it hilarious that people wait on the Fed decision? Like there's this entire, we have an entire media setup. We have entire pundits. The entire world is sitting waiting for when are 12 people going to destroy the currency? and the entire we wait. Okay, let's wait.
Bated breath.
Let's wait. What's going to happen today? And we wait, and that becomes a pricing mechanism of every single other thing: houses, every other value, all of our wealth, and we think it's wealth. And we what's going to happen today with those 12 people? And all
so
over
bizarre.
the world, it's literally ludicrous. Like, what's Occam's razor? What's more simple?
Yeah.
Technology is actually deflationary. Prices should come down, or let's wait on those 12 people and say, what should I do with my
I mean, it's amazing to me, as an aside, like the amount of infrastructure that is put into trying to predict what they're going to say. Like there are hundreds of millions of dollars spent on like machine learning that analyzes the tone of their voice. And I mean, there are governments that spend less money in terms of their entire military.
When you think about the world, the amount of people on both sides of that, in their entire thesis comes down to when somebody is going to manipulate money.
Yeah.
And they call themselves an economist.
Mm-hmm. And trying to predict when they're going to manipulate that money.
Predict in a chaotic environment,
Yeah.
in something that is impossible to predict to when that's going to happen. Somebody asked when Jeff believes world reserve currency. I don't think it looks like it might look like that on the way through the kind of the first order, where people would actually peg to their currency to this and run an inflationary monetary policy against it. But what that would mean with technology moving faster and faster is that that their currencies would fail faster and faster. And so the end state, I don't believe a world reserve currency. I believe it is money, and it's going to be a peer-to-peer internet, peer-to-peer network that has velocity of money and money embedded into it. So it won't look like the reserve currency is essentially an architect of an existing system that relied on gold, and then pegged to gold, and then created a reserve currency that everybody else pegged to. You can't have a currency that's pegged to a country. It's going to be a network, and the money is going to be embedded into it.
I feel personally attacked given the fact that I put so much time and effort to prepare our streams for the FOMC meetings.
Hey, you don't need to feel attacked.
Because I know that people are sitting
People care.
around in bated breath. I'll admit I got laid off in 2020. And as I went into my investing full-time sort of methodology, I quickly realized like, it doesn't matter what I do. Like just do whatever the Fed wants to do and I'll make money that way. And it worked.
That's why there's hundreds of millions of dollars spent in trying to predict what the Fed wants to do.
And that's why, when you think about hundreds of millions, it's way bigger than that, right? The entire existing structure, everything, houses, all value creation, all out of that concept. It's just, it's so ludicrous. And we give it, and why do you do it? And why do you do it as a media company? Because more people are looking for the same thing. They're reinforcing the thing that's making their life worse.
Yeah.
All over the place, trying to predict the outcome. And here's the thing: what you learn throughout time, central banks are always co-opted by the state, and so it's not independent. It can't be independent, because if they continue to tighten, and you have a cascading credit collapse, and house prices fall, and people are out of work at the rate that they're going to be out of work, and banks are failing, then society is going to demand that the Treasury becomes the Fed. And you will vote for people who will tell you, you'll vote for people who tell you, I can save it all by giving you more free money. So where we are in the cycle, you can guarantee that eventually the what looks independent, and it's not really independent, but what looks to have some independence, is going to be co-opted over time.
Jeff, this has been an incredible conversation. I'm truly very sad that I unfortunately do have to say we're wrapping up here, because we do have an episode of Fed Watch with Ansel, Lindner, and CK coming up in just a moment. I'm putting you on the spot. Thank you yet again. You're coming back on the show. I'm not taking no for an answer. I will just bother you incessantly. From my NIM accounts, no less, so that you'll know which one all of my NIM accounts are.
Perfect, Chris.
Jeff, for our audience, how can they stay up to date with you, your writing, the work at Ego Death, and all of your countless other companies?
Probably the best is just on Twitter at Jeff Booth. I typically link to new articles that I write. If somebody's building into the space, go to Ego Death, and we'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Yeah, just want to echo that. Thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. I can pay you no higher compliment than I said very, very little. Because I talked a lot.
True.
And are you guys personally in Amsterdam?
No. I wish. Oh, the company won't let me go.
Right.
They're afraid I'll never return.
It is a very valid concern. But just before we jump off, Jeff, I want to ask you a totally unrelated question. What is something that has nothing to do with Bitcoin that you take great pleasure in, that you spend your time doing outside of Bitcoin? We talked about your guitars. There you go.
So I'm at my lake house right now. We're at the lake house because for the last year we actually sold our place in town, moved here because we traveled all year with the kids. We took them out of school and or online school, and we traveled all year long. We just decided to do that again this year. But if you said what do I enjoy, I said this recently on a podcast. Wealth isn't money. Wealth is relationships. And so what I enjoy is just if I said I'm the luckiest person on the planet, it's my relationships, and that provides anything that I could ever want. So it's probably the reason I play guitar. It's because I love sitting around a campfire, or having beer with friends and play guitar, and so I have an environment here where 26 of my childhood friends bought around us.
Wow.
You can imagine now they're all married and kids and everything else. So you just imagine that's just the childhood friends besides people I met here. And so it's not a very huge community. So if you just think about what that looks like, there's always something to do. And so I feel pretty lucky.
Awesome. That is a fantastic answer.
I'm going to steal that. I'm literally going to send this clip to all of my childhood friends and be like, all right, it's been done. We can recreate this, guys.
Let's do this. Yeah.
Jeff, thank you again. We'll be talking to you again very soon, I'm sure. We're going to cut to a commercial break here and be joined by FedWatch, but I want to remind everyone to please smash that subscribe button down there on YouTube. Smash that subscribe button. I'm never going to figure this out. Up there for Rumble. We're going to be back after this commercial break, but of course, lock in your tickets to Bitcoin Amsterdam before prices go up. Use promo code BMLive and get 10% off of that and anything your heart desires in the Bitcoin Magazine store. We'll be back with FedWatch after this.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Fed Watch. My name is Ansel Lindner, and I am here with my Daponair co-host, CK. How are you doing? I'm not hearing you. Are you on mute? Still on mute, buddy. Big day. So CK and I, we met in Nashville for the first time. Well, we met in line at the Bitcoin conference a couple times, but we got to spend some hours together at the Bitcoin Day in Nashville this last weekend, and it was great. I gave my community on Telegram, I gave them a big rundown of everything that happened there. So appreciate the Bitcoin Day folks for putting it on. It was very well run, and I hope they do more in the future. They're kind of reassessing if they're going to do some other events, throughout the rest of the year. So if you see those come up in your local area, support them if you can. Get out there and support the Bitcoin Day stuff because it's a great educational opportunity for people. So CK, are you back?
I think so.
All right.
Can you
Yep.
hear me?
Gotcha. Yep.
The button would not let me unmute. Like I was virtually locked out. But here we are. Ansel, it was great to get to hang out, man. Bitcoin Day is awesome. We got to hang out with a lot of awesome Bitcoiners. Me and you, we chatted for several hours. We bowled, drank the night before. It was a really good time.
Yep. Met some guys from Unchained Capital were there. Ibex was there. Robert Breedlove showed up. We actually had an FBI agent. That was kind of unexpected. And
that was an experience.
Yeah, he was a cyber security guy. And he spoke at the conference, and it was cool because I was in the other room competing for people against him, and apparently our room took like 75% of the people, so I was pretty happy with that.
Yeah, no, your talk was a lot of fun too, and honestly, we got to get Kent on the show. Kent is your co-author at is it BT? What's the website that you do with him?
BTCM.co.
Yeah, btcm.co. So kind of part of the Bitcoin markets brand, but great content there.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll get him on. That was really fun. We did a fireside chat, and people seem to really like that kind of format. So maybe we'll do it again. What else we got going on this week? We got big CPI, obviously CPI announcement this week. So we're going to cover that.
Yeah, big news yesterday.
We have charts, Bitcoin charts, and some currency charts and some other things to go over. Then I wanted to talk, well, I'm going to break down CPI and a few different things like food and shelter. I want to look at those things in depth. And then what else we got on tap here is the kind of globalist takeover of Europe, man. There was some surprising elections, and there's some more to come in the next couple of weeks. So we'll see what happens over there in Europe. And then finally, I just have 2 articles to summarize with China. And that's it. That's what we got on deck for today. Anything, any other admin notes to plug up front here? CK?
No, I mean, gotta shill Bitcoin Amsterdam. That's in less than 30 days. That's going to be a lot of fun. Guys, Europe is ground zero. This is where we need to put our flag down and fight for Western values, fight for the freedom to mine and the freedom to run open source software. Fight for Bitcoin, honestly. So like we need to show up to Europe. We need to show the folks in the Netherlands that Bitcoin is real, that Bitcoin is going to continue to fight, and that this is something that should not be pushed away. It's something that should be embraced. So use BM Live, get 10% off your tickets. We just announced the agenda, and it is absolutely fire. Absolutely fire. We could go over some of the panels if we have time at the end of the episode. A lot of great macro panels. But y'all, Bitcoin Amsterdam, use promo code BMLive to save 10% off. Tickets are going up in price again next Friday, and then they're going to go up again for the last time right before the event. So this is time. Buy your ticket. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I think this is great timing because of everything that we're going to talk about with Europe, the rise of populism and perhaps the decline of the euro, right? So currency conversation is going to be big over there in the next 6 to 12 months. And this is perfect timing. The Bitcoin conference needs to get in there and make some news. So
I guess I got another
excited for
show,
that.
Ansel.
I'm unfortunately
before we
not
get
going.
into the
Yeah.
show, I got one more show.
Yeah.
Get your subscription to the Bitcoin Magazine print. That is the current one. The censorship resistant issue is absolutely fantastic. But 2, this upcoming issue, I can't tease the name yet, but it is going to be incredible. And it has an amazing op-ed penned by the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, where
Wow.
he's not holding back. He's going to take his shots. He's going to call out who he needs to call out. So really incredible to have that in the next issue of Bitcoin Magazine. It's absolutely going to be part of Bitcoin history. So you're going to want to buy that. So subscribe now, get the censorship resistant issue. And then just next month, you're going to get the newest issue of Bitcoin Magazine as we kind of round out our first 4 issues in this most recent series. So yeah, that's all the housekeeping I got. Bitcoin Amsterdam, Bitcoin Magazine. Ansel, let's get into the charts.
All right. So we start every episode with a Bitcoin chart. So Chris, could we get chart number 1, please? So, I mean, Bitcoin was showing a little bit of strength here before the CPI was announced yesterday. It did look like it could possibly break out. It was testing like weak resistance, I thought. It had broken kind of that stair-step pattern downward, and it was going back up. And then, of course, the CPI came out. Now, what I think is kind of interesting about all these charts we're going to go over is nothing fundamentally changed, right? Like CPI is backward looking by a long way. I mean, it's August and we're already halfway through September. So nothing fundamentally changed in the Bitcoin market or in the stock market or whatever. But it's just this news that hits the wire and causes people to sell. I think there's a lot of bears out there. There's a lot of people on the short side, and they were, looking for any excuse to say, oh my God, this is, the Fed is going to hike 100 basis points now, and the stock market's going to crash. And so I think that the bears are definitely a majority in this market, even though nothing fundamentally changed. And I think Bitcoin and the stock market should trend upwards at this point. Just the news hitting the wire pushed it down. Do you have any thoughts on like that kind of idea of, this is about the message, or the medium is the message, kind of, I guess, in a way. And, do you have any thoughts on how the market reacted when the news hit yesterday morning?
I mean, everyone that I respected was talking about this kind of like price pump as like a scam pump, or kind of a nothing burger, maybe a sell the news event, like a little pump leading into CPI news. I really do feel like sell the news is like a very strong trend in Bitcoin, period. It's definitely true in crypto as well. So not to say it's a heuristic that one should trade on, but it's proven itself time and time again that if there's this big anticipated date, the price might act against that date. But as soon as the news kind of unfolds, an opportunity to dump. So I don't know.
Well,
I don't have anything better to say about it, but it wasn't super unexpected that this kind of fell apart.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've been writing about the sell the news thing on my newsletter, and the first half of that saying is buy the rumor, right? So you have to actually have some buying before you have a selling of the news. And so if this was a buy the rumor, sell the news type of thing, it kind of makes sense that it didn't fall all the way back down to the bottom, right? Because it just pumped a little bit and then it dumped a little bit, and that there's nothing to see here. We could bring this into the merge stuff. I don't have a slide for that, of course. I don't just mention this slightly here, is the buy the rumor. There really hasn't been a lot of buying of the rumor. I would expect like 100% pump, not 10% pump or whatever we've seen recently. So I think ETH might experience the same sort of thing, where a little bit of buying the rumor and a little bit of selling the news, and that's about all she wrote for the merge. Do you have any comments on that, or should we go to stock market?
Yeah, I mean, if the merge was not priced in or whatever, if it was really going to drive massive price appreciation, we would have seen a lot more by now. And honestly, I think the fact that we haven't, that it, ETH is kind of hasn't, I guess it's been relatively strong-ish in a pretty negative overall scenario, but not that strong. Honestly, I think it's going to give investors a lot of pause, especially ones that were like very optimistic about this narrative. I don't know. I think the macro forces are far outweigh any sort of like narrative hype, and this narrative is just not that salient, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is a very weak pump for being a pre-fork pump on Ethereum. I mean, we've seen ones in the past where, building in. Well, we see them on all these altcoins. That is their major thing, is the marketing around these upgrades and what they're going to deliver and all this stuff, and so that drives a lot of speculation. But Ethereum just really hasn't had that at all this time. So kind of interesting. Almost might even turn into a non-event, at least initially. I mean, this isn't really the topic of the show, but I think that give it a few weeks and we might see some bugs appear or something like that, but not initially. I think they'll get through this initial merge. What do you think about that idea?
Don't know. Don't know. Do not care.
Okay.
If the merge goes down without drastically damaging the price, I do owe Eric Wall a tungsten cube, so I'll be out $400. But if something does happen, I get a tungsten cube. But outside of that,
what's the time frame?
Honestly, it was unclear. Like we pretty much just said, within 3 or 4 months, and gentleman's agreement. But I really don't think it's going to be that. I think it's either going to be like it works and I buy a cube, or there's some sort of thing that forces it to be postponed. Honestly, I'm not hoping for disaster for Ethereum, but it might happen. I don't know. I'm just it's gonna happen, and we'll see. It's funny. Right now in Nashville, it's like a Nashville Bitcoin week. We have a bunch of activities that are going down. It started with Bitcoin Day on Saturday, and it's we had a big pizza party at a pizza place next door, sponsored by Bitcoin Magazine yesterday. We have the Nashville Bitcoin meetup today, and then we have a thing called Grassroots Bitcoin on Thursday. And a friend who is in the ETH space, he was like, "Hey, there's a merge party happening. Y'all should come." And I was like, "Yeah, no, sorry, we're busy. Like, we got stuff to do
in Nashville."
Like, yeah, and the reality is like, okay, whatever. ETH is doing its thing. Bitcoin's doing its thing. Like, Bitcoin has its own agenda, and it's just moving forward. And the people in the Bitcoin ecosystem, we're just moving it forward.
Right.
I don't think most Bitcoiners care about what's happening in altcoin land.
Yeah, so that's a hint. Let's move on with the show. Let's talk about the stock market. I mean, Bitcoiners don't really care about the stock market either, but I think that it's important to take a look at. So because of the correlation with Bitcoin, but it got way over its 50 period moving average. It looked really, really bullish, and then it crashed with the CPI, very similar to how Bitcoin looks, but it is a little bit green today. I haven't checked it in the last couple hours, but I think that the fundamentals here, both for Bitcoin and stocks, are very similar, and that, well, being the reasons why it would pump throughout the rest of the year. Like, I think there's a heavy cash position on both of these two asset classes. I think that it's stock buyback season, and in Bitcoin, it's kind of like the end of the cycle type of bottoming season, and so there's a lot of similarities, not just the risk on asset, but there's a little bit deeper reasoning why that these two assets are correlated at this time. And yeah, so it bounced right on that 61.8 Fibonacci once again that I've been pointing out for a long time, and we'll see if it continues higher. Next slide is the DAX. This is the German stock market. I just wanted to point this out because we did bring it up last week that it looked like it was going to test this trend line, and then it shit the bed as well. Next slide. This one is the European natural gas prices. It is down 42% from the high. It's coming down a little bit slower than I expected. I thought it would just, fall off a cliff and come back down, lose 50% in a week or something, but it's slowly coming back down. Some of that acute pressure is being lessened over there in Europe. And so I think this chart explains that. So that's all I have for the initial charts, Christian. Any comments on those things? Any kind of broader currency topics that you want to bring up before we jump into CPI?
No, let's get into it. It is really interesting to just kind of see CPI marching forward, and I think both of us really connect the fact that CPI has nothing to do necessarily with inflation. So any of the Fed's activity might not have, might not be solving it. It's almost like there's a fire over there, and then the Fed is like busy trying to put, dump water in the complete wrong spot. So yeah, let's get into talking about the print.
All right. So of course we had, before we put up the slide here, Chris, I just wanted to do a little bit of intro here, and the print was 0.1% for August. All right. That means that in August, there was the general price level increased by 0.1%, very near zero. On an annualized basis, if you take that 1 month and annualize it, it's 1.4%, not the 8.3% that is the year-on-year number. And I said this last month, and I'll say it again this month, that year-on-year is extremely misleading. It's not now. Chris, can you bring up that first slide? That is the looking at the CPI year over year, and these are the kind of components of it. Okay, core, energy, food, etc. And the problem with this is that it's a year-on-year measurement. So this isn't showing what has been going on the last 2 or 3 months. The last 2 or 3 months, prices have not increased. Energy prices have crashed. And look at the energy on this chart. It's positive, right? If you're looking at a real CPI chart, it should be negative. You should see that orange, which is energy, negative 10%. That's how much it fell in the last month. It fell 10%. That's incredibly deflation, or not deflationary, but going down. Yeah, Christian, go.
So your position is that we need to look at month over month, not year over year numbers.
Yes, and go ahead.
I'll just say, and post COVID, with really every single year offering up very different kind of macro hurdles and scenarios that the economy has to deal with, that you're saying it's not even worth comparing apples to apples, because supply chains were very different a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, if we break this down into housing, that's one of the, well, let's go to food first. So let's see what slide that is. Food is slide 10, please, Chris. This is a chart of the food component of the CPI, and you can see it's really, really high. It's the highest since like 1978 or 1977 or something like that. But that is misleading because it is coming down. Food costs are actually turning over and coming down. If you go to slide number, let's see, number 12, please, Chris. This is the month over month of the headline number in blue, and then the food in red. So you can see that the red is coming back down. It is the lowest, except if you take out December of last year, it is the lowest out of that yearly print. So it's very hard. The year-on-year number is just misleading. You wouldn't even know that it's turning over and coming back down if you look at the year-over-year number. So I think it's very misleading. Now, I already jumped around here and I'm out of order, but let's go back to talk about shelter. So that would be number 6, please. Yeah. Now this is the month over month for shelter in green, and it is going up slightly. But the kind of point here behind shelter is that it's very hard to, I mean, okay, I already said that CPI was released for August. That's already a month ago. But if you look at the year over year numbers, you're looking 12 months back, right? So how are you going to make decisions today based on information that's 12 months old? And then the shelter number is actually older than that because, you know, people don't re-sign their rental agreements every single month. They maybe do it once a year, or maybe once every few years, or they buy a house once every 5-10 years. And so you don't change the payments for shelter don't change very quickly. It takes a long time to price that in. So when you look at this number for shelter, you're actually looking at almost 2-year-old data. I mean, I would say 18 months to 2 years is what's affecting this data. And what was 18 months to 2 years ago? Yeah, the exact heart of the COVID crisis, the summer of 2020. So that's why this is really high. And when you kind of pick through the CPI and you look at all these different components, you know, you can explain a lot of this stuff. It's not super bad. It's not 8.3% inflation. Okay, we have had zero inflation pretty much for the last 2 months. Let's go to Christian, stop me anytime. But here is, if you go to the next slide, number 7, this is a headline from Business Insider, and it says rents are tumbling in 27 of the U.S. biggest cities, while some are rising. 8 are still rising. Next slide. So what I did with here was on the left, you can see the full 40, whatever, I think it's 40 cities. And then I kind of zoomed in on the right, cut it and zoomed in a little bit. And you can see that a lot of these markets, rents are falling. It was the first month that rents really fell in over 20 months. So if you're looking at the CPI year over year and it's screaming higher, but then you dig in and you look month over month, oh my gosh, actually month over month, rents fell on average. So you're going to miss that pivot point. You're going to miss the pivot point in the market. Go next slide, please. This is another headline. This is from ABC News. U.S. rent prices finally show signs of cooling down. And I wanted to read a couple of these headlines. Let me bring this up. Americans are finally starting to see the red-hot rental market begin to cool off after record growth. A combination of strong demand, low supply, and high inflation have kept pressure on rental prices nationwide. But for the first time in 20 months, asking rental prices saw negative growth, falling 0.1% from July to August, according to CoStar Group. So that's all I have for the shelter component and the food component. We can dive in a little bit deeper if you want to, Christian, but what kind of comments do you have on that?
I mean, it's interesting to see, like one, the structural issues with year over year, given kind of like the assumptions that, you know, everything that's happening in the economy is changing very dynamically right now, especially because of the macro situation. It is really interesting, again, like CPI is, I think, being most impacted by supply chains and borders and politics more than it's being impacted by inflation. That's one of the big things that we've been talking about here, which is why, like, this kind of like generally accepted fact that CPI equals inflation is really turning into very, very misguided decision making, potentially by Fed and other central banks, which they're trying to solve a problem, and they're not focusing on the right thing whatsoever. They're actually creating more chaos. So just kind of diving into, how even the data that they're using is not kind of like objective for how they should be responding. I think it's really shocking, because the key thing is that these people are impacting in a outsized way an economy that they don't even understand. And people and economic agents are using what they say to make economic decisions themselves. So it's like almost like the blind leading the blind. So I mean, that's what this show's about, is kind of teasing apart what's really happening and talking about that. But it is kind of shocking to see, one, the picture that you're painting with these numbers, and then two, what is like kind of like a generally accepted reality today, which is very far from what you're kind of demonstrating.
Yeah, and Powell does. I mean, he's spoken about what he's targeting. So yeah, he says, we want inflation to come down. That's like what they're aiming at, and to do that, they're looking at month over month. He said we need to see several months of decelerating numbers. Okay, that's what he has said for their to pivot or whatever the case is. So they're looking at month over month. They know that it's month over month is the important part. And that's just one thing that has really bothered me over the last couple months. And maybe the audience can tell, because I've just tried to hammer this home, that anytime you see like inflation numbers from people, if you see charts and they're warning you of imminent danger ahead or something, and it says year over year, you got to call them out on that. Say, well, what has the last month or two been? Right? Are we accelerating into this, or are we decelerating right now? And compared to maybe 6 months ago or whatever, what are we like? So it's very important to concentrate on a month over month. And if you do that, CPI is relatively flat. And I mean, Powell knows that, whether he's going to pivot or not. Like we've said, it's not super important. But the market thinks that they're going to hike. And so that has temporarily rattled the market. What else? Where else do you want to go with this, Christian?
So, I mean, is your perspective is that they will continue to hike, or is the imminent pivot coming soon?
Oh, coming soon. Well, I've changed my perspective on this. I thought it was going to be even before now in the year. Hasn't come. Then I said September, there's a good chance that they at least don't raise by 75 basis points, that they raise 25 or 50 or something like that. Because I expected, just like we've seen, July and now August to be, sorry, got my alarm going off on my phone. Sorry about that. The July and August are pretty much zero. So are they really fighting inflation? What are they going to say? I'm really kind of watching out for what Powell says next week at the FOMC meeting. I'm going to watch what all of the kind of talking heads from the Fed are saying, because, that is part of their monetary policy, is to have these talking heads go out there and say things, make headlines, and talk the market into a certain direction. So I'm going to be watching that leading up to the FOMC this week. And I don't expect them to pivot. I don't know if they're going to do 100. I think they'll still do 75 because I think Powell does want to pause. But that's just my take.
All right. Well, we'll have to see what happens. As things continue to get more chaotic, though, that leads to our next subject, which is populism.
Yeah. So I only have one slide for this, but I'll call for that there, Chris, when I need it. So yeah, populism is on the rise in Europe. And what do I mean by populism? I kind of mean anti-globalism. So anti-EU, anti-WEF type people. That is the rise of populism. And now this week we saw kind of an earth-shaking event in Sweden. The anti-populists won. I think they're the Sweden Democrats. The globalist party is the Social Democrats, and the Sweden Democrats won. They're going to headline a quote unquote right wing majority by one seat in their parliament. And this is kind of it was seen as like a stronghold of globalism and EU and all of this stuff. And now they're going the other direction. So Sweden is a really big, I guess, earth-shaking development this week. Now, I think another question is, Sweden is trying to get into NATO right now. And if these right kind of nationalist forces in Sweden are taking over, do they not join NATO? And what will that do to the macro of the situation? If Sweden pulls out and their what do you call it? Their candidacy for NATO, that could have knock-on effects. So I think this is a very interesting situation in Sweden. We can go on to Italy, unless you have comments about Sweden, CK.
I mean, was that part of this kind of political movement was to reconsider the NATO thing, or is that just you kind of trying to read the tea leaves?
That's me trying to read the tea leaves, because from what I understand, now I don't follow Swedish politics super closely, but I have read a few things over the last couple of days, and they are very anti-immigration. That's the big thing over there in Sweden. And also they are quote unquote anti-globalist, or more nationalist, right? If you're anti-immigration, you want strong borders. That doesn't really fit into this idea of a whole connected Europe. So there's a little bit of Euroscepticism in there. There's a little bit of anti-immigration. And so NATO would fit right in there. I would think NATO would symbolize kind of, giving up sovereignty to a supranational organization. So I would think that they would be against that. So I'm reading the tea leaves, but kind of extending logically from what I understand of as their platform.
Got it. Yeah, no, let's go to you said Italy next.
Yeah, so Italy has an election coming up in 11 days. This is going to be even more important than the Swedish elections. Italy is, I think, the 5th largest economy in Europe. And if you cut off the southern half of the country, it's like the richest per capita in Europe. So it's a very relatively rich country and relatively big economy. And they are the same sort of party, this nationalist, anti-globalist party called the Brothers of Italy. There's a few of them are like this, but the Brothers of Italy are surging. So Chris, if you could pull up the last slide there, number 11, or sorry, 13. This is showing just a chart of the polls, and you can see the top line there. That is the Brothers of Italy. And then the Democrat Party, which is their kind of far left-wing Euro globalist party, I guess. They've been losing support over the last couple weeks, pretty dramatically. Five Star Movement, who is an interesting party. Don't know too much about them, but they are quite populist. They have populist leanings. And there's several other these smaller parties that are allied with the Brothers of Italy. So the Brothers of Italy are led by Giorgia Meloni, and she is a very outspoken person for God, country, and family. So that is the anti-globalist message. There is no like identity politics with her. It is God, country, and family. So another thing I think is interesting about, we have Sweden and now Italy perhaps are going to be going this way. Perhaps they could form a coalition with Hungary and maybe some other kind of parties in Europe and strengthen the kind of their ability to fight the EU. So one of the problems with Hungary was, they have this populist leader in Orban, but the EU is constantly attacking them and constantly saying, you need to do this or that. You can't have sovereignty over this or that. And if he doesn't do it, they call him undemocratic and all this garbage. So he has been strong-armed by the EU for the most part. And Poland kind of gave in earlier this year and last year to some of the policies from the EU. And so now if we have Sweden and Italy and Hungary, maybe they can get each other's backs. I think this is kind of an interesting beginning to a rightward movement, an anti-globalist movement over there in Europe. Now, I want to bring this back real quick to why this is important for Bitcoin, because these parties are fundamentally anti-Euro. They're Euro-skeptic parties, European skeptic parties. They don't like the European Union. They don't, not all the time, but they typically don't like the Euro. And so this is a full frontal attack on the Union of Europe and their currency. And where does Bitcoin come in? Bitcoin fits right in there. As people start dropping their currencies, Bitcoin is there to help them solve their problems. So what do you have anything to add here, Christian?
I'm just going to zoom out and talk about how we have been kind of trying to spell out or draw out or point out the cracks in Europe for as long as we've been doing this show. And every single week when we check back on Europe, more and more of the game theory for why this structure that the EU is not going to last continues to play out. So it's very interesting to see this. If you were to reflect on the last kind of big election season 8 years ago when Donald Trump won in the United States, you saw Europe effectively, you saw populism win in the US and globalism win in Europe. Now, we're potentially seeing a world where populism could win in both Europe and the United States in this upcoming election season. And that's a very different dynamic than 2016 leading up to this point. So, we're definitely seeing a pendulum swing and it's popcorn here. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, one of the first cracks back then in 2016 was Brexit. So we had Trump and they had Brexit. So that was kind of an initial crack. But on the continent, in the real depths of the EU, there was nothing like this. So also that brings up a good point. With the midterms, it does look like the populist wing of the Republican Party is going to make massive inroads, win tens of seats in the House and a few seats maybe in the Senate. And that would be a huge shift over here too. So this year is kind of this pendulum shift. And it might be like the last time that the globalists really have full control to do their dirty work, for 10, 20 years. See if this is the year that the populists win. Another thing, a lot of people might say, we shouldn't be talking about politics. This is Bitcoin. But really, populism is about national sovereignty and about localism, community. And that's one of the things that Bitcoin really thrives in, right? Bitcoin promotes these types of values. I think the Bitcoin values are more closely oriented with localism and personal sovereignty than it is globalism and Marxism, right? So we want to see the global Marxists lose, and then Bitcoin can have a very bright future with the populace. So that's all I have, man. What else should we talk about? Should we get Q&A from the audience? Has anybody asked a question?
Yeah, we could do a little bit of Q&A. I think do you not want to talk about China at all, or?
Oh crap, dude, you're right. I forgot all about China. I have a couple articles
China
here
before wrapping up. Yeah, hey, we're going from CPI in the US to Europe, and now we got the China update. So rounding out a pretty good show.
Yeah, okay. So this is just an article from the South China Morning Post. It is kind of a mouthpiece for the government, but I thought this was a really good article that I did share with my Telegram guys. So I wanted to read a little bit of it here. So the headline is China shipping exporters lament plummeting demand as peak season turns off season. Exports, long an anchor of the Chinese economy, typically surge before seasonal holidays in the West, but shipping agents are struggling to find enough cargo this year. After China's weakened exports surprised the market on the downside in August, shipping agents across China are struggling to find cargo during what is traditionally the peak shipping season ahead of Western holidays. Quote, we are in fact seeing at Zhangzhou-based shipping agent said on condition of anonymity. The overall shipping demand from customers is plummeting. Another agent based in Tianjin likened shipping prices to cliff diving because of their sharp descent. The weakened export demands are reflected in the slowdown in China's export growth, which fell to 7% 7.1% in August year on year from 18% in July, while exports to the United States saw a year-on-year decline for the first time since March of 2020. According to the Freightos Baltic Index, the spot sending a 40-foot container from Asia to the west coast of the U.S. dropped by 20% to $4,345 in the past week, and it is 79% cheaper than it was this time last year. Quote, this decrease reflects falling demand for freight, excess images among some importers as inflation reduces spending among some consumers, and as others shift to other types of goods and services as the pandemic recedes, said Judah Levine, head of research at Freightos. Many retailers pulled peak season orders earlier in the year to avoid delays. So that's pretty much all of that one. Do you have any comments on that, or I can jump into the oil demand one?
I mean, we're seeing demand destruction left and right, and I'm sure the oil demand will show that as well. Back to you.
All right. So oil prices under pressure as demand concerns mount, and this is from oilprice.com. Oil prices fell early on Monday morning as bearish sentiment continued to weigh on markets amid expectations of further interest rate hikes and concerns about Chinese oil demand. Brent started the week more than $1 down at $91 a barrel at the time of writing. West Texas Intermediate was trading at 85. Okay. The main downward pressure on oil prices in the past few days has been a report that China could see its annual oil demand shrink for the first time since 2002 because of COVID restrictions under Beijing's zero COVID policy. Oil imports over the first 8 months of the year were down for the first time since 2004. Reuters reported earlier this month, noting that there were now expectations for a drop in fuel demand during the upcoming holiday season. Energy Aspects predicted that China's fuel demand could go down by 380,000 barrels per day for the whole of this year due to restrictions. Quote, the lingering presence of headwinds from China's renewed virus restrictions and further moderation in global economic activities could still draw some reservations over a more sustained upside, said IG blah, 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 blah. Worrying forecasts about Chinese demand have coincided with a more interventionist policy from central banks, with both the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve planning further rate hikes in their attempt to tame runaway inflation. Demand concerns centered on the impact of rising interest rates to combat inflation and China's zero COVID policy, said blah, blah, blah. All right, that's it. That's it for this one. So huge news, though. This is a drop in oil demand, the lowest oil demand out of China since 2002. And what's the size of their economy? Their economy is like 5 times bigger than it was in 2002. And oil demand is lowest since 2002. I haven't heard anybody talking about this. This is a huge story. And one reason why I say, oil prices are going down. Oil prices are going to stay down for a while. There is no $200 barrel oil coming. And that's going to pull down inflation. So I'm going to end this kind of my
That's going to pull down CPI.
Yes, that's going to pull down CPI. So I'm going to
let's get this right, Ansel.
full spectrum, full turn on this. So we started with CPI, and now this is showing that oil demand in the world is slowing, and that is going to affect oil prices, which we all know CPI closely follows. So that's it, man. Now I'm done. I wasn't done before.
It's a lot, man. I mean, again, we've been kind of broadcasting this, but it really is insane. 2002 China was on a global scale relatively small compared to today. It was a rising power. It was a power that the US was enabling, but it was by no means an entity that could, throw weight around like it can globally right now. So if oil is like the lifeblood of an economy, the lack of demand there is really showing the compounding effects of what's happening globally, as well as like the compounding effects of the activity that the Chinese government is doing internally. It's they're very effectively curbing demand and destroying their capability of being productive.
Yeah, and China joined the WTO. They were let into the WTO in 2003. So this is the lowest that their oil demand has been going back pre-WTO. So that's it's gigantic. So I want to sum up today. So the kind of lessons that I wanted to get across were concentrate on month over month, not year over year for CPI, and on the rise of populism is going according to plan in Europe and the US. So that's good. Get those Marxists out of power. And then finally, China is slowing dramatically, like we have reported over and over again. It's kind of a slow motion, car wreck at this point, but China continues to crash. So that sums up what today was all about.
All right, y'all. That's all we have for today. I'm CK Snarks. This is Fed Watch on Bitcoin Magazine Live. You can find me at CK_Snarks on Twitter. Ansel, where can people find you?
Bitcoinandmarkets.com is my website where I do a newsletter. You can find me on Twitter at Ansel Lindner, and join the Telegram group, Bitcoin and Markets. Just search for that. Also, I am on tomorrow with Q. So everybody watching, come back tomorrow. I think it's 2 p.m. Am I wrong? It might be 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. That's when I'm coming back on with Q for tomorrow's live stream. Should be a banger. That's it, man. That's all.
All right, let's go. Thanks, guys.